Welcome back, everyone. In the previous lesson, we made it so that the list of conversations would load into our left panel, and when the user clicked on one of those conversations, it would open the conversation detail into the right panel. In this lesson, we're going to add all the details into the conversation details page. So we'll start by adding a chat box, then we'll create a message row page to display each message of the conversation, and then we'll add the OpenAI chat action to make all the magic happen. Let's jump in. So we'll go to our conversation details page. Let's start by adding some container elements. Use a div to make an outer. Use another div to make a header inside. Use another div inside the outer as a body. And then finally, another div inside the outer. That's for our chat box. Inside of the body, we'll also have a repeating list. And that's what will display all of our messages. In the chat box, let's add an input and a send button. We'll insert another element, text input, and for the button, I'll use an image. Of course, not this image. I'm going to change it to media library, and then we'll upload a new file. I like to use icons from a site called feathericons.com. They have a nice send icon here that we can use, so I'll click on it to download the SVG, and then go back to the studio, and we'll upload it. Next, I want to make the styling a little different. I'm just going to remove this class, so it should be just about the right size to start. Now at this point, I'll typically go start previewing it so I can see what it's going to look like. So a couple things. I definitely want to anchor this input to the bottom because that's how it normally is in a chat app. So what we'll do is we'll make the outer container that we made display flexed and make the body of it take up the full height except for what's in the header and in the chat box. So let's go back to the studio and do that real quick. In our outer, I'm going to add a new style class. We'll enter a name, and then we'll edit our new class. In layout, we'll change the display to flex, and our flex direction should be column. That means that there's one column of each thing inside, and our things inside are the header, the body, and the chat box. So we'll have one column where each of these is a row. And for now, we can leave the rest. In our body, I want to make another new style class. So we'll name it, and then we'll edit the new class. If we go into layout, and we scroll down, there's a property called flex grow. Flex grow allows you to tell the children of a flex container whether or not to grow in size and by what ratio compared to the other children in the container. So our flex container is the outer, and the body is one of the children of it. Right now, none of the children have a flex grow property set. So if I put a value of 1 in here, that will make it grow to accommodate the full height of the page. In the studio, because the height of the page is just growing based on the content, we don't see it just yet. We will in a moment once the repeating list fills out. So remember, when this page opens, it's going to open inside of the component in our dashboard page. So we also need to make sure that the right panel has the right styling on it in order to accommodate the height. So that means this right panel, which is already full height, needs to also have its children taking up the full height. So we'll need to make sure the container app and the component are full height here. We'll go to the class here, and I'm going to change the size to have a height of 100%. And then the component active page will do the same thing. Now for this one, because this component class is likely shared across other things, I'll use an inline style property to add the size. So now that all of this is set up to take up the full height, we need one more place for setting the height, which is in the outer that we just created. Let's go ahead and make that 100% height as well. So now everything should take the full height of whatever the content area is in this right panel. Let's go take a look in the preview. All right, now we can see our box at the bottom. Probably want to add some padding and some spacing to make this look a little bit better. And then we'll add our repeating list row so we can see what that will look like. And then begin using the OpenAI chat action to send messages back and forth. Let's go back to our conversation app, add a few more settings. In the chat box, I'll go ahead and create a new class for this container as well. And then we'll add some styling to it. We'll make this display flex. That way we can control the positioning better. Make sure it's a row. I don't want anything in here to wrap. I'm going to go ahead and center by using justify content. And I'll also go ahead and align the items center. So now the text input and the button will be center. I'll close the layout and let's add some padding. I'll do 1 EM of padding. That just gives us a little bit of space around. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So after looking at this, I actually think we'll move this back over to the left. So go back into layout, change our justify content to be on the left. And you can easily switch back and forth into the preview to check it out and see exactly what it looks like anytime. Normally, I'll actually have this open on another screen or next to it in the same screen so that I can see both actually while I'm editing. You can also open it up on your phone to make sure that you're designing it to work on all devices. All right, let's go back into our studio. There's one other thing I would like to add. I'm going to add a custom property under used props. I'll add a new property for gap. And I'm also going to do 1 EM there. What that did was it made a gap between the items inside of the Flex container. So our Flex container here is the chat box. And that gap placed a 1 EM gap between the items. So if I were to add a third item, we would have a consistent gap between all the items inside. Now let's change the placeholder of the text input. So instead of enter value here, let's change that to enter a message. All right, so next, in our repeating list, we need to get a list display page set up. So I'll be making a new page for that. We'll insert a blank page. I'll go ahead and put it up here above. I'll drag the width to make it a little bit smaller. We're going to change the name to conversation message. And I'll also go ahead and remove that styling from the page body, just like we did on the other new pages we created. Now our message is a pretty simple page. We'll have a container element, so a div, and then we'll also have a text element where the message will actually be. For this, we'll remove the default text so that it starts off empty. And then I'll name this element message. We also need to set up our data binding. Because this is a message, it'll come from a field from our messages collection from the message field. So now, on our repeating list, we can select that page. If you want to see what the messages will look like in here, you can go back to the display text and put some values in. And you'll now see the repeating list display 3 of them so you can see what it will look like. But for our purposes, I really don't want to have a message in there because you may possibly see the word message pop in and display before the data is there. All right, so now let's set the data up on our repeating list. We'll go to Data and Collection List, and we'll select Messages for our data collection. We're going to bring all fields, but we need to put a filter here because we want to filter for only the messages that belong to the current conversation we have open. So we'll add a filter. The field for messages that we want to filter is the conversation ID, and the value that we want to filter it with is from the current record, which is a conversation, We want to use the conversation ID to perform the filter. So in this way, when the conversation details opens, the repeating list will only display messages from the conversation that you opened. We also want to set up a sort. So I'll collapse the filters and add a sort. We'll select the timestamp and keep it ascending. This way the most recent message will show at the bottom and our first messages will show at the top. With our repeating list set up, we're now ready to create the flow and the action that will actually send the request over to OpenAI. So I'm going to click on the send image, go to the events tab, and in the click event, we're going to create a new flow. We'll give it a name, and then we're just going to add one action to this flow. And I'll search for chat to find it quickly. We'll just add that to our flow. The OpenAI actions in Builder require you to have an OpenAI API key. If you don't have an API key yet, follow the links in the description of the video to get yours set up. Once you've got it, you'll come here and go to Manage Project Secrets. Secrets in Builder are a way to securely store things like API keys. So I'm going to make a new secret. We'll call it OpenAI. We'll create it. Then all you need to do is copy your API key from OpenAI and paste it into these two places. Once you've got your API keys entered as secrets, you'll just select it from the menu here. Now let's go through each of the inputs in the action. The behavior input tells OpenAI how you want your chatbot assistant to act. For our purposes, we actually want to pull the behavior from the current record field value, from the conversation that we have open, from the initial behavior field. Remember, when this runs, we're inside of a conversation because we've opened the conversation details page. So this will bring the initial behavior from that conversation record into the action to send over to OpenAI. The prompt input is the message that's being sent over to OpenAI that will be replied to by the AI. So we'll also change the type on this one because we want it to come from the enter a message input that we put on the form earlier. Next is storage method. This action allows you to use Builder data collections by default as the storage method for all of the messages that are created back and forth. You can also choose to store it locally in the browser or create a completely custom setup. For this demo, we're going to use Builder data collections. And there are some fields that we need to map. The first field is the conversation ID. This is what will tell Builder which chat history to send over to OpenAI with each prompt. And just like how we pulled in the initial behavior from the current conversation, we're also going to pull in the current conversation ID. So we'll change this to current record field value, our conversation collection, and the current conversation ID. The next inputs are all about the messages. The first one is just selecting which collection you're storing messages in. For us, we just called it messages. And then the last four fields of this section are the fields that you're mapping to send back and forth. So all four of these are going to come from that same messages collection. So we'll go ahead and select messages as the collection for all of them. And then for each field, we'll select the appropriate field from the messages collection. So for type, we'll bring type. For message, we'll bring message. Timestamp to timestamp. And conversation ID to conversation ID. So now whenever the action runs, it will create a message record inside of the messages collection, and it will store all the data properly. When it receives the response from OpenAI, it'll create another message in the messages collection with all the correct information there as well. Scrolling down, there are two more things we need to fill out. We need to tell it what flows to run as things occur. So this action is going to happen in two steps. First, it'll send the message entered by the user over to OpenAI. And we want it to go ahead and refresh our repeating list as soon as that happens. So that way the message that the user typed in is displayed in the message history while it's waiting for the response. And we also want to refresh the repeating list at the very end after we get the response back. So for both of these, we're actually going to select page binding. The page binding flow that's built into every page of Builder automatically reruns the data setup that you have on any elements on the page. So in our case, the repeating list is set up to get all of the message history. And as this action progresses, it's creating more message history for the conversation. So by running page binding in here, it will automatically update the display as the action progresses. There are also some additional settings for error handling and advanced settings for things like changing the model and more. Okay, with that, we should be ready to preview. Let's go take a look at how it works. All right, so let's ask our home repair assistant a question. We'll just enter a question and hit send. We see our question shows up first while it's waiting for a response. And here's our response. Pretty detailed. So there's a couple things I want to do here to make this look better. Because we had placed this into a paragraph element or a text element, it's not formatting it correctly. Most likely the response that came back from OpenAI actually has carriage returns and things inside of it that we can set it up to properly display. So in the next lesson, we'll get some of that cleaned up. But at this point, we've got a working bot using ChatGPT to answer questions about any topic we'd like. We can switch over to a different conversation and ask it questions specifically about that conversation. We can also go back into the studio at any time, go into our conversations data collection, and add new conversations. So if I create another record here, so say I wanted to have a conversation with a no-coder, and we would fill out the behavior for that bot. And then back in our preview, we now have a third option for no-coder, so we can ask it questions with that expertise in mind. So congratulations, you've now created your first ChatGPT-based AI app with Builder. In the follow-up lesson, we'll get some cleanup done, and we'll make things look and function a little bit better. Thanks again for watching.